Hey, everybody, it's Mr. Clark. So I want to talk to you just a little bit about what comes after the Civil War, the later part of the 1900 or 1800s. We've spent a lot of time on the Civil War, and now we're moving on beyond that. Immediately, right after the war, we go through a pretty painful period called Reconstruction, but then things are going to start to turn around and get a lot better. So here's a few pictures and things to tell some of that story. Reconstruction, well, look at the house in this picture here. Total and complete mess. We spent 4 years of Civil War completely destroying ourselves. Well, now how are we going to put all this back together? Well, Reconstruction is a period from immediately after the Civil War until the end of President Grant's second term. About 12 years we give to that time period. Politically, we have to figure out what are we going to do with those 11 states that rebelled and tried to destroy the U.S. How do we repair all the physical damage done during the war? And what do you do with as many as 4 million former slaves, many of whom who have no education, no skills other than what they had to use on their particular plantation or whatever they worked? So those people are going to need a lot of help. Well, Lincoln's idea to control those three important issues was to forgive and forget, let's move on. Congress didn't like that at all, especially Senator Charles Sumner, who was almost beaten to death in the U.S. Senate chamber. Congress wants to punish the South. There's a terrible disagreement between those two sides, and then Lincoln's death, like we did in class on Tuesday, just confuses everything. Ultimately, 3 constitutional amendments will be added. The 13th is going to abolish slavery in the United States. Any of those 11 rebelling states have to agree to abolish slavery if they're going to rejoin the U.S. The 14th Amendment gives equal protection of the law to all Americans, including former slaves. And the 15th Amendment is going to give male former slaves the right to vote. Women won't get the right to vote in at least federal elections until the 1920s. Some big exciting stuff, though, that happens. Cattle drives and new transportation are going to change how America eats. Cattle drives take cattle from Texas up to Kansas, where they're put on the railroad and sent to Chicago to be disassembled. Yes, disassembled. Will definitely change the way we eat in America. The Transcontinental Railroad, we're going to do something about here in a few minutes, connects East and West Coast and helps to unify the country, going from the Mississippi River the whole way out to the West Coast. We've been doing that for a long time with the Oregon Trail and such, and of course all the California gold miners, we've talked about that. Well, now railroad is going to replace the wagon train. There's a second industrial revolution that's going to lead to the tremendous growth of cities, especially western cities like Chicago, St. Louis, and eventually the California West Coast cities. This revolution in industry is different than the one we did before, which was powered by water. This one's powered by steam, and that makes a huge difference in the amount of weight of the material and the items that we can produce. Unfortunately, there's terrible corruption in all 3 branches of the United States government. And those 3 branches, well, under President Grant and others, seems like there's a lot of bribery, a lot of corruption, a lot of illegal things going on that government people at the highest levels are involved in. The Industrial Revolution leads to a huge growth in factories and leads to the growth of labor unions, which were formed to protect workers. A lot of workers felt like they weren't being paid properly and their working conditions were unfair and unsafe. They used techniques of strikes and lockouts to get their company owners to negotiate with them and give them better conditions. And even sports and leisure activities become a new part of American life. Sports like baseball, football, basketball, they all become popular. And in the picture here, this is the gentleman who invented the game of basketball. And I'm not sure who the lady is who is about ready to take a shot. Looks like they're out in the middle of somebody's yard somewhere. Those sports very different then in the late 1800s than what we're used to now. And eventually, the Chicago World's Fair of 1893 is kind of a launching point for the 1900s. All kinds of new inventions on display, stuff that you and I use all the time today. And, well, the big centerpiece of that Columbian Exposition was called is a Ferris wheel, a big iron sculpture structure that moved. Better than the Eiffel Tower in the previous World's Fair. The Eiffel Tower doesn't move anywhere. It just stands there. It's really a great thing. It's a important piece of world culture. But the Chicago World's Fair wants to outdo Eiffel. They want to out-Eiffel Eiffel they do so by unveiling a Ferris wheel, made of iron but moves and provides some entertainment. That's a lot of our story that we're looking at in Reconstruction, but in particular today, we'll look at the Transcontinental Railroad.